not something that you completely understand. What does trauma look like? And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat, or you can unmute yourself, given that time and space when I open up for questions to engage it. The one thing I do have to ask is if you are putting anything in the chat as it relates to your personal experience, please refrain from using any names or using any identifying characteristics. Just to share a little bit about my story, the reason and the way that I got into engaging the conversation around faith-based trauma is because I have journeyed through it. And during my doctoral thesis, I looked at LGBTQ faith-based trauma. But being a person that has come through, and thank God, come through healing from church hurt and even still healing. Because the thing about trauma is you can have things that can be triggering. And no matter how you may have no matter how you think you've processed through it, there could be one or two things that come up and that you're like, oh man, I didn't even think about that. Oh, why do I feel this way? And I chuckle because I just got a phone call. Someone said, could you do the prayer before such and such? I was like, no. And we can talk about that later. So that's why I say that sometimes it is always still a journey. As days lengthen into weeks and months and even years of adversity, the hurt grows deeper. The church cannot hope to save a man on Sunday if during the week it is complacent witness to the crucifixion of his soul. And I think that is something very good to point out. I always say, as much effort as we put into wanting to save someone's soul, we should put as much effort into wanting to save someone's life. When someone is journeying through their own experience with religious trauma, with church hurt, it is important to give grace in places that you don't understand and to give compassion in places that you do. I'm sorry, not sure why my ringer is still on. But I say all that to say, it is not just the individuals, because this is about it starting with you, but it's not just up to the individual to arrive at a place of healing. It is important for the church as a whole to recognize that there is a holistic experience that goes into assisting people with healing from trauma. So let's talk about church hurt. Church hurt is a deeply distressing or disturbing experience that happens in church that causes an individual trauma. There is a difference between being offended and church hurt, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And that's important to distinguish because there are many people calling certain things church hurt that are not church hurt. It may be hurt feelings, but it's not church hurt. Church hurt is a form of religious trauma. Now understand that church hurt is a form of religious trauma, but not all religious trauma or faith-based trauma is church hurt. And that's important to distinguish because someone could say to you, you know what, I'm dealing with religious trauma. And the first thing a person will say is, oh, what church did it happen in? Or what did you experience in church? And that may not be where they experienced their situation. Because faith-based trauma adds another component. It's a deeply distressing, disturbing experience that occurs in a religious-based setting like a church, or from a religious ideology. And you may be thinking like, what? I have no idea what that is. What does that mean? So these are examples of faith-based trauma. A child who is taught that they're an abomination according to the sacred text of their family's belief system. So we're talking that is familial. That is a faith-based trauma scenario. Another place that it can happen is in an institution. a parishioner who attends a church that is teaching an anti-LGBTQ doctrine. It could also be someone that is told, maybe a woman is being told that she can't be a pastor or she can't be a minister or hold leadership position simply because she is a woman. Then you have societal, where a person is told that they can only be a certain type of way. Their gender expression can only be a certain type of way. But all of these things are done in the name of religion. So it's the same as men being told that they have to wear pants and being discriminated because maybe their gender expression is something else. And then you have the wonderful government, a discriminatory act that uses religious tenets, principles as its basis for discrimination. So things like bills and things that are put into place that discriminate against a particular marginalized community, all done in the name of God. And someone may say, well, how does the government do that? Remember that our Constitution is built on religious principles. And so some people say, well, you can't do that, you can't be that because, and this is what I believe. So these are other ways that religious trauma can show up. It's important to understand that faith-based trauma and church hurt, so I'm gonna tie them together. And remember, they are cousins. They're not siblings, they are cousins. They're in the same family, but they are not completely related. Can cause a person to question not just who they are in relationship to the divine, but who they are in relationship to their entire existence. And this is big. This is big because when I hear people talk about, oh, well, you can't compare what happens to you in church to God because that is through human beings. When you are in a place and you've been emotionally, psychologically, or spiritually harmed in a way that has caused you to have trauma, it is easy to blur the lines between the two. And please understand that this conversation that I am having is based on years of research. This is based on action research, participatory research, meaning I've had this conversation in several rooms, ranging in different states and countries at this point, which I'm grateful for. So when I say these things, I am not just speaking about as it applies to myself. I'm speaking about how it has shown up in conversations that I've had with other individuals about how they have come through their journey. The biggest, hardest part for them is they were praying while they were experiencing things. They were praying and asking God to remove them. They were talking to God on a continuous basis. They were searching the scripture for justification on why could this be happening? Is it a count it all joy experience? Is it a cast all of my cares experience? What is happening? And then when they walked away, they were so traumatized that they were just like, I don't know what to believe because God have done this to me. And it becomes so hard for people to separate God inside of that experience when the person that may have harmed them or the situation that may have harmed them was a representation of who God is. And that becomes really, really important when someone comes to you as well and says, I am hurting. It doesn't then become tear apart what they're feeling because it doesn't make sense to you. It is then about being a space where someone can be fully and completely transparent with how they are feeling. Healing takes courage, and we all have courage, even if we have to dig a little to find it. I wanted to put this up before we begin to get into more of a conversation, because any time a person shows up in a room, whether it affects them or not, even if they're learning how they can be of support to someone who may be going through, I feel like that takes a certain amount of courage. And it takes a certain amount of power to step into a space to say, I recognize that this is a subject matter that is affecting the church. And I'm talking about the church as a whole, not just as an individual church. And it's funny because when I was looking at content around church hurt, if you go to YouTube and you type in healing church hurt, you will find tons and tons of videos that are well over 20 to 20 minutes long, well over hours of people engaging this conversation, because it is a real thing. And it happens across marginalized communities. It happens in people's personal and spiritual journeys. It is happening, and not all the time is there a place to engage in the conversation. So let's talk about a little bit about what church is. So when we're talking about church hurt, that is different than faith-based trauma, which is why I said they're cousins. If this is happening inside or through the four walls, inside or through the four walls. So it can be caused by the church, the idea of the church and or its members, to anyone inside or outside of the church. I have had conversations with people that they were harmed, talked about, ostracized, scandalized, and so I'm gonna use that word. If I made it up, just give me license, I'm a poet, by people inside of a church that they weren't even members of. And depending on how far that reaches, how deep that goes, it may make them turn away in its entirety. We have to remember that we are often the first representative of God that people will see and meet. And so when someone comes inside of the church or talks to someone from inside of the church, whether you're a leader or just a lay member, and then they experience behavior that they don't expect to experience inside of the church, then that's where it can become problematic. It can be emotional, it can be physical, and or it could be spiritual. It can happen from the church leadership. Church attendees' actions, or someone who self-identifies as a Christian. So even if this is not occurring inside of the church building, the fact that this action or these words or this commentary is coming from someone who identifies as a Christian, the pain of that to the other individual can be spiritually detrimental. You could spiritually kill them. It also can come from oppressive doctrine or church culture. Because sometimes it's not what's happening in the pulpit, it's not what's happening in the pews, it is the culture that has been cultivated within the atmosphere. So I want to talk about a part of what church hurt is, because we need to get into, just real briefly, and I'm going to hit it about this much, because the conversation of trauma is so big that trying to do it within this time window will leave something out. But I just want to give a little context, just a little bit, to the conversation, so that when people have a healing conversation with their therapist or with their pastor or with anything else, then they can move in a place of maybe understanding where they are. This is not a diagnosis. Let me put that up. Maybe I need to, if I had a chalkboard, I would write it. There's nothing about this conversation that I am attempting to diagnose you, and I'm not attempting to give any medical advice or any psychological advice. Thank you for saying that, Minister, because I want people to know. I don't want them to leave this space and say, Dr. Renair said, I'm traumatized. But one of the reasons why oftentimes people look at trauma as it relates to church hurt is because it can manifest itself as a complex trauma, meaning multiple traumatic events and the impact of exposure to these events. Why is that? Why does that happen like that? Why is it not always one singular event? And it can be. But many times what happens is because there is a small line between being hurt, trauma, and just being in one's feelings, right? People will sit, they'll sit in it because they don't want to be outside of the will of God, or they don't want to walk away from their purpose. They don't want to walk away from their calling. They're waiting for God to tell them to move. They're waiting, they're waiting, they're waiting. And so while they're sitting in the midst of what is happening, it's still happening. And oftentimes, trauma, especially church hurt, can find a line to something else, another area in their life where they may be experiencing or have experienced some type of trauma or hurt. It's triggering something. There is another type of trauma that's on this list that I feel that I need to address, especially when we're talking about church hurt. Vicarious trauma. Because what happens when someone has been hurt? Whether it's the church hurt or hurt feelings, what happens? 9 times out of 10, they begin to have conversation with other people. I know, because I was guilty of it. You start to have conversation with other people to share what it is that you're feeling, and you're not necessarily having the conversation with your leadership or someone in leadership that can assist you. You're having the conversation with other members. And guess what? It could be traumatizing to them, especially if they are journeying through their own path, through their own discussions, through their own feelings, and through their own emotions. And you've gone to them, and without asking permission, because oftentimes we fail to ask people, is it okay that I vent to you? Is it okay that I share this with you? We just walk up to them and start bleeding. And so we have to be very careful when we take information and start transferring it to other people without being aware for what that can do for and with them. So we just talked about a bit. I want to check in to see if there's any questions or any comments. I know you may love my voice, but I want to make sure that I can get to hear from you before continuing on. But I just wanted to touch this trauma piece just a little bit, because when I need you to distinguish between what is church hurt and what is hurt feelings, that becomes a part of the conversation. So someone's been hurt. They have said that they are experiencing church hurt. Now, I've already kind of pushed the conversation around that being trauma. There are certain things that they may experience. And this is why this is so important, not to tear apart someone else's experience. Because this is what trauma looks like. It looks like fear. It looks like grief. It looks like anger. It looks like guilt. They may be emotionally numb. They may have difficulty making decisions. They may be having reoccurring dreams. They may be questioning their spiritual belief. I'm not going to get into all of the other ones, but the ones I want to look at right now are interpersonal reactions. They may be feeling irritable. They may be feeling distrustful. They may be crying easily. They may be withdrawing. I've watched people get very upset at individuals when they leave the church without having thought that maybe this person is going through something that is traumatic for them. And so it becomes important not to create a gossip mill, not to question why they're making the decision in a way that makes them feel defensive. Because then what happens is, if they already have been in an experience where they felt like they had no control, here you come being controlling. It could also show up in a different way where now they're very judgmental, they're afraid, they're feeling rejected, they're feeling abandoned. And so they may move in trying to control the areas of life that they can. And it can emerge in different ways. I specifically remember just eating myself into a stupor and drinking myself underneath a bench. But no one knew about that except for the people that were in close proximity to me. But what was happening in the world around me was conversation about me withdrawing. I didn't understand until I had a conversation with my therapist that my withdrawal was because I was dealing with trauma. So let's talk about offense, because I want us to understand, and Pastor Rodney specifically asked me to have this conversation, and what is the difference between church hurt and an offense? What's an offense? An offense is an annoyance or resentment brought about by a perceived insult to or disregard for oneself or one's standards or principles. Why is that important to know? Because if you're upset because you didn't get an invite to someone's party, that is not church hurt. That is an offense. If you're upset that your leadership did not do something that you wanted them to do, that is not church hurt. That is a perceived insult or disregard for one's standards or principle. If you are upset that someone that was your friend is no longer your friend, and they used to hang with you and now they hanging with other people, that is not church hurt. That is an offense. And so what do we know that we're to do with offense in the church? The Bible says that if your brother sins, go and show him his fault, and in private. In private. If he listens and pays attention to you, you have won back your brother. See, there's an and it's italicized because it's two parts. If he does not listen, take along with you one or two others, so that every word may be confirmed by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. Not one. And don't take your good friend, because your good friend is going to take your stance. When you grab your witnesses, make sure you grab witnesses that can give neutral input. Witnesses that are willing to tell you, no, you're wrong here, and you may want to rethink this. If after you've done that, if he or she or they pay no attention to them, tell it to the church. And if he, she, or they refuses to listen to the church, then let him be to you a Gentile and the tax collector. We know how some people felt about tax collectors. Next month is April 18th. I have a feeling about tax collectors. So you can understand what this is saying. And I wanted to point this out because when people have an offense, they often do not do this. They skip the talking to the person in private. Now, sometimes you could talk to the person in private and they just act like they don't know what you're talking about and continue to do the same behavior that they've been doing. And you could take 2 witnesses and they will continue to do what they've been doing. But as you see, once you tell it to the church, if they refuse to listen to the church, you know what that means. Now, if the person is a leader, follow your church's protocols for how you handle that. If you're to go to the covering, if it's the pastor, and if it's the covering, then there may be different steps that you have to take. But be clear to follow how it should be done through how your church handles offense. Any questions? Any comments? Be good? Okay. What you're going through does not go unnoticed. God sees every injustice. He's got you in the palm of his hand. Doesn't matter if it's church hurt or church offense. It does not go unnoticed. And it may go unnoticed within the building, but it does not go unnoticed by God. And that's important. Because sometimes we set in to exact revenge or to handle it ourselves in a way. And instead of making things better, we make things worse and may cause not just harm to other people. Remember, the theme is it starts with you. You may cause yourself some undue harm. You may cause yourself to find yourself in a situation that was worse off than where you started. So you've identified, at the end of the day, I heard everything you said, Renair. I'm clear that what I'm dealing with is church hurt. How do I deal with that? So first, find you a trauma-focused therapist, coach, advocate, or support group. It is helpful if you can find someone who has a background in religion or spirituality, because they may be able to engage the conversation with you differently. But the trauma-focused part becomes very important because they will be able to handle you and work with you, support you in a certain type of way, even if it's a support group. Be careful, again, of creating a support group inside of a church or a ministry or anything else around this particular type of subject. It's helpful to be engaged, be able, and I'll talk about it at the end, when you share your experience that you're going through, it is helpful if that person is not attached to the place where you feel that you have felt the harm. Give yourself grace. One of the things I've heard survivors say is, how could I have been so stupid? Why did I stay so long? Why did I do this? How come I didn't realize it? Such. But at the end of the day, give yourself grace. And I say that with anything. Give yourself grace. You know why I say that? Sorry, that's what happens when you live on the highway. You know why I say that? It is because we are quick to give other people grace. I understand. It's okay. I love you. You're my sibling in Christ. You're my sibling in God. But we will not give the same grace to ourselves. Be careful in comparing your experience to others, even if it does seem like the same experience. We all have different lived experiences. We have different ways things show up and support us, how things show up and affect us, how things show up and make us pause. So even if I'm going through something similar, be careful of comparing your experience to others. And that's one of the reasons why I say be careful when you're talking about your experience with people that have connection to the place or people that you maybe have experienced something with, because there is something called trauma bonding. And the next thing you know, instead of it being a conversation, it's now become a crusade. And if there are more than one people or persons that is having an experience, and that may be something that you have to sit down and discuss with your leadership, with your pastor, with someone that you trust. And again, if you would like to address the issues within the church, follow the bylaws, follow the protocol of the church. And again, find someone, and I keep saying find someone outside of the situation, because some of the feedback that I have gotten from people that have experienced church hurt, even in other countries, is this conversation about camaraderie. And what happens when they've shared it with people inside of the church where they were, and that person took it back, and then everyone banded against them. Or people felt the need to protect whomever, and then that became an experience. Or they left, and now nobody's speaking to them that's still inside of that establishment. When a person has decided to leave, know that was not an easy decision for them to make. And I think from what I've heard and some of the things that have been discussed in some of the workshops that I have given, I think that people don't realize that person is really going through something when they decide that they no longer want to be part of that particular church, house of worship, or ministry. Now, what if you're the person that they came and talked about this with? And I know I'm flying through this, but we have a certain amount of time, and this is a big topic. That I have done conversations on this that have been hours long. So we're making this 40 minutes and we got it going. Someone comes to you and they say, this is where I am, this is where I'm going, this is how I feel. Here are some things to think about. We're thinking about reciprocity. Be to someone what you would need. You know, the Bible talks about love thy neighbor as thyself. I tell people all the time, and you can stop with love, but I need people to put little ellipses there. That's the little dot, 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 and put other things there. Love thy neighbor, support thy neighbor, be reciprocal with thy neighbor. Give to the person that's coming to you the same thing that you would like to have experienced if you were going through something. And not just church hurt, any personal business that someone is coming to share with you. Confidentiality is confidentiality. It does not mean that as soon as we hang up the phone, it is no longer confidential. And again, if you are in leadership, there are certain rules that you have to follow. But I will say, unless they are telling you that they are getting ready to harm themselves or harm someone else, please use discretion when you are sharing what someone has shared with you. What if they're not planning on leaving? What if they just needed a moment to get it off their chest? What if they just needed a second for someone to pray for them, for someone to love on them, and they got off the phone with you feeling relieved, but yet you've taken that moment to go tell somebody else? So then they show up on Sunday, and then someone walks up to them and go, I heard you're going through something. You have now set them back into the narrative on why they don't trust anyone in the first place. Choice. It can be a big trigger when someone is going through their survival inside of this, and you have taken away their choice, which is what we talked about earlier and what we're kind of talking about right now. I chose to share with you. I didn't choose to share it with the entire youth and young adult department. So now you take away my choice. Or how about I chose to share it with you as a minister, as a deacon, as church leadership, and now you've taken it higher up. And that's not what I needed in that moment. And so now I'm having to deal with something I did not plan for. Perspective. Be aware, but don't take responsibility. Don't take responsibility for something that is not yours gently. Meaning, because I've talked to you about what I'm going through, I don't need you to jump on the defense team for that person. I don't need you to be the lawyer. I don't need you to be any of that. I just need you to give me the space to engage this conversation in. I need a second to calm down. I need a second to process. I need a second to just be. Also, here it talks about recalibration. Get rid of the language around the person is overactive, being overreactive, that they're being oversensitive, that they're being over anything. Or my favorite is someone told me that they experienced something and what they were told, what they were experiencing was so painful. And that person told them, you just need to pray. You're not praying hard enough. You need to pray and get over it. The problem was, and I'm going to get ready to wrap it up in a minute with a quick meditation, but the problem was that every time they step back into that facility, they begin to shake. They begin to cry. They were having panic attacks. And this person just told them, well, you just need to pray about it and get over it. You're doing the most. You're oversensitive. And they just were like, well, I can't help how I'm feeling. And so that's why I say to you again, there is a difference between hurt feelings and church hurt. And when you begin to treat someone as if what they are experiencing is just them being sensitive, what will happen is they will stop talking to you. And they will close in or go somewhere else. And God forbid they close in the wrong way, because then that can lead to some depression and a couple of other things. So I do want to give 4 or 5 minutes for questions, but I do want to share this with you because I don't want us to leave on this note. I want us to have something to think about as we close out.
Aligning my mind and heart
with the mind and heart of God, I center myself
in pure being.
In a state of spiritual realization, I remember that I can never be broken, limited, or unworthy.
Courageously, I rise into my true spiritual nature in this moment of healing.
I heal the whole of me as I accept that I am brave, I am bright, and I am beautiful.
as I heal in mind, body, and spirit.
I support healing in my family, my community, the earth, and the world.
Centered in pure being.
I am a healing presence.
Yo soy una presencia sanadora.
I am a healing presence.
Ebo ananonsun gogogo.
I am a healing presence.
No matter what you do, you have the ability to be a healing presence. Even if you're the person that's going through it, or you're the person that's sitting and being of support, you are a healing presence simply because you're here, simply because you have chosen to be a support or to be supported through your hurt, through your offense, and through your pain. So I say to you, if you would like to reach out to me, if you would like to contact me, you can reach me at pinklovewellness@gmail.com. These are my social media handles, and I'm going to shut this off to open up the floor for brief conversation as we close out. And in the meantime, in between time, be loved and be blessed.
Thank you, Dr. Renair. This was beyond amazing, beyond much needed, beyond informative. I can go on and on and on. I just have a quick question. I don't know if you're going to have time to answer it. Things that have been presented for years as church hurt, I now know from your short workshop that it was an offense. And I have your definition of church hurt, but could you give a hypothetical example of what church hurt is? I know what an offense is now. You know, not that I didn't know, but a lot of things that I even thought was church hurt, or I said was church hurt, no, I was offended. So could you give me a hypothetical example of what you would consider church hurt?
Well, so the Religious Trauma Institute has done some research around this conversation. So we're talking about a married kind of thing. We're talking about something that is also producing some type of reaction, even if the reaction is numbing, even if there is no reaction, but it's creating some type of physiological, emotional, or psychological response to it. So that's the only way that I can say it, because it's on a case-by-case basis. But I think what has happened is church hurt has become the umbrella for everything. Everything. And so what happens when a person is really experiencing that, it kind of gets brushed aside as just them being emotional or hurt. But from some of the feedback that I have gotten, it has caused the person some type of reaction to who they are inside of their spiritual journey, who they are in relationship to God, who they are in relationship to the church. So sometimes people have left the church, organized religion, and have said, I still want to have a relationship with God, but I don't want to have a relationship with all of you. And I am going to lean to my mental health professional in the room and ask Minister Wadan if he would like to give some conversation to that, because I'm not the authority. I'm just a person that's sharing information. So
you know, definitely the reaction to a being hurt. So being hurt by the institution, and sometimes the person in the church is the institution, right? And so when it begins to kind of really interfere with who you are with God, where your relationship with God is no longer safe, right? You have this connection, this dyad. It's me and you, God, and here I am, part of a community that is supposed to strengthen my faith, and I'm trying to have this relationship with God, and I'm unsafe. And the reason why I'm unsafe, it is because of the message that I am hearing. And so you tend to get that a lot particularly around LGBT people, right? That are a part of traditional churches. And then they leave those traditional churches and either decide, I want nothing to do with God, I'm going to do my own thing. And, talk about, I'm not into organized religion, and they do their own spiritual thing, because that connection, it's uncomfortable. It's unsafe. So I can't be in the space where your God is demonizing me. And so that it's not an offense. It's interfering with my understanding of myself and the divine.
That's the key word. And I kind of like took that off because I had to get everything in a certain amount of time. Safety. The moment someone begins to feel unsafe, that is a big red flag. A big one. Because no one, nowhere should feel unsafe inside of church. So does that help, Minister?
100%. Thank you both. Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Minister Wadan. Does anyone else have any questions, any feedback, anything to add? We'll be ending shortly.
Hi. I don't really have any comments. I just wanted to say thank you. I myself have not experienced church. All glory be to God. But I did want the opportunity to recognize it and to also know how to navigate it when I see it, right? So this is why this was important for me. As soon as I heard that you were doing this workshop, I said, I'm in it, I'm coming, because I needed to hear this and I needed to learn what this was. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Deacon.
And I just wanted to piggyback off of DIT Shani. And that was one of the reasons for my question. So if someone comes to me, I could say, you were offended that, I don't think that was church hurt. Do you can go like you and Prophet Wadan could, but just to let them know that it is a difference, that it is a difference. So this was, again, phenomenal to be able to say, it's the difference between church hurt and someone hurting your feelings and you being offended. So you really, y'all, in this short time made it clear, if you still love God for the most part and you can still go to somebody else's church per se, that's not church hurt, because you're not taking yourself out of God, you're just taking yourself out of the place where you were offended.
So let me insert something there, Minister. We want to be careful. So this is information, but we want to be careful telling someone what they are and are not experiencing. So it's good to keep it in the back of your mind so you know maybe what scriptures to share, what direction to send them into. But because you can't, in that moment, if that's what I feel if that's what I'm feel that I'm having going on, you telling me that is not going to do anything but make it worse. Because then I'm going to feel disregarded, like you're not listening to me. So this becomes information for you to maybe say, well, I know, there's a protocol in place that I need to follow, ... such, other than, because no one can diagnose anything for anybody else but someone who is qualified to diagnose them.
I agree. I agree.
You know what I mean?
My wording.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So I can know. That's what I mean. That we're absolutely. I agree.
Yeah, and I think that if anybody has like because sometimes when you're in rooms with people that know you or maybe know people with you, we tend to say, well, I want to be careful what I say or what I don't say. So if you do have a question or something that you would like to have a conversation with me about, please, again, feel free to email me or find me online and send me a message so we can have that conversation. But I will say that if it is something that is actively happening for you within your church or within any organization you're a part of, I probably will do my best to try to refer you to someone that can really be of therapeutic support to you. Because I also don't want to go against any bylaws or anything that are already in place. Like, I don't want to get caught up in that. Like, I want to be clear with that, because I am not a therapist. I am a researcher and an educator and a coach. So that's, that's how that shows up. But on that note, I know that we have in Eastern Standard Time, I believe it's 8:00. And in Central Standard Time is 7 for the closing preacher. So I believe you have like maybe an hour or so before the closing preacher comes on. So again, if you have any questions, anything you need to know, any information you would like to receive, please feel free to hit me up. So that's my presentation, and I thank you for your time. And I apologize. I said deacon, but I'll say DIT. And to minister, my friend, I say prophet. So I apologize if I messed up anyone's
That's
titles.
fine. We love you. Thank you.
I love you all. So on that note, I'm going to get ready to end this, and you take care. Have an amazing evening, and I'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.